Hi, dear friends. I want to begin by acknowledging that I am speaking to you today from Wurundjeri Maribek, the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and I extend my deep respect to Wurundjeri peoples and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are listening in or not. I acknowledge that this land was stolen. It was never ceded. Sovereignty still exists here. It belongs to First Nations people, and it was always and will always be Aboriginal land. I am recording this on the 26th of January on a day that makes so many of us feel really sick to the stomach, and for First Nations people that is a deeply sickening and cruel date to be celebrating our culture, our character as a nation. It is inspiring to see so many people are waking up to the significance of this date and why it needs to be changed. And that is a really good thing. This little video is actually, my purpose in recording it is actually to bring a little bit of a hopeful window into the near future in relation to some of these issues. We are moving in, as I have been banging on about for a really long time, it feels like, into a very pivotal period of time that begins in March 2023. And the significance of the astrology of this time has particular significance and implications for First Nations people and the issues that we face as a nation in relation to equality, justice, and recognition of sovereignty of First Nations people. So I wanted to break that down just a little bit in the hope that it might lighten the feeling of doom around the fact that things still don't seem to have changed very much. The first day of mourning was established in 1938 by an incredible group of Aboriginal people in Sydney, protesting the 150th anniversary of the landing of the First Fleet, which did not actually happen on the 26th of January 1788. That was actually the anniversary of Governor Arthur Phillip planting his flag in the ground and his, blokes having a drink and celebrating the king and claiming British sovereignty over Australia. It was not yet called Australia, of course, at that time. It was the colony of New South Wales, although it wasn't actually the colony of New South Wales until February that year. So literally the 26th of January was the day they planted the flag in the ground. And interestingly, that happened at the time that Pluto was in Aquarius, the last time that Pluto was in Aquarius. And on the 23rd of March 2023, Pluto will return to Aquarius. This is really, really significant for many, many reasons, and I'm just going to focus them in onto this particular topic today. But to give you a sense of how important this is in terms of the advancement of human rights and of the shift in power dynamics, existing power dynamics, and the overthrow of established orders. The last time that Pluto moved into Aquarius, it will be in Aquarius, and it was the last time for 20 years. And that was a period during which the French Revolution occurred and the monarchy were completely overthrown, and a new system of democracy was introduced in France, which not only affected France, it took over the entire world like wildfire. It led to the American Revolution of Independence, the Revolutionary War, the end of their ties to Britain. It also introduced, the French Revolution introduced the very first charter on the rights of man, which became the basis of the Declaration of the Human Rights. It also was a period in which the very first, the only slave rebellion, so the transatlantic slave trade was, of course, still being, undergoing in the Americas. And in Haiti, the only successful slave rebellion took place during Pluto in Aquarius. And that was, interestingly, I find that, it's a little interest that I have as well, that was not only the only successful slave rebellion in history, but it was a slave rebellion that was actually initiated through and held together through a magical worldview, through traditional voodoo practices. So, one of the qualities and characteristics of Pluto in Aquarius is that it is, as I mentioned, a total overthrow of an established order of power in society. Aquarius rules society, Pluto rules power, and sudden eruptions that are coming from underneath and that topple things. Of course, the other thing that happened, it is really profound for us during Pluto and Aquarius, is that Australia was colonised. And what we see there in terms of this overthrow of the established order of power is that the existing power structures that were in place in Australia, and it was an extremely complex and elaborate and a sophisticated network of power relations between people through systems of law, ceremony, government, governance, trade, culture, language, etc., across the vast reaches of this continent. And when Europeans colonised this nation, that was dismantled completely over time. So those who had power in this country had no power after the arrival of Europeans, or very little. Of course, it is a mythology that, traditional power structures, language, culture, etc., were wiped out. That is not true at all. However, it was so devastatingly damaged that, First Nations people remain marginalised and oppressed in our society today and suffer incredibly catastrophic rates of every single kind of marker of well-being that you can measure in society contemporarily. Aboriginal people, First Nations people, Torres Strait Islander peoples are suffering just outrageous levels of poor quality of life and, rights and privileges, etc. What's really interesting about Pluto and Aquarius is that one of the other significations is that it coincides with events where somebody from outside comes in and overthrows, or somebody from the margins comes in and changes the way things go. So prior to the last revolutionary period of Pluto in Aquarius, which, as I mentioned, is the French Revolution, the American Revolutionary War, the colonisation of Australia, etc., Declaration of the Rights of Man, and the period prior to that was between 1532 and 1553, I think. And that was a period in which, my goodness, I just got distracted while I was trying to remember the dates. Forgive me, guys. That was a period in which the Reformation took place, right? So this was a very different kind of scenario when the power in the world, the global power, was in Rome through the Catholic Church. They were the masters of empire. They were the richest entity in the world. They had more power than any monarchy. They really were the emperors. The Catholic Church was the empire, really. And what happened during the Reformation was that there was a revolution against the Catholic Church that gave birth to Protestantism, literally protest against the Catholic Church. And this overthrew the power, the central position of the Catholic Church in the world. And it shifted that centre of power eventually to England. Because one of the key centres, although the Reformation did not begin in England, the impacts of the Revolution, in the same way that the French Revolution did not only impact France, it spread like wildfire across Europe and the Americas and everywhere else. The same way the Reformation spread across the world very, very quickly through the technological advancements of the printing press. Excuse me. When, famously, Henry VIII took advantage of the Reformation and established himself as the head of the Church of England so that he could divorce and marry. And that really shifted the global power to England, and they became the colonial power within a fairly short period of time, which then led to the next period in relation to our specific story, that the English then colonised Australia. And where we are today is a consequence of these series of events. We also saw in the previous Pluto in Aquarius period, which was between 1286 and 1308, which was also an age of air, which we're in now. So that was a very, very long time before. And that was, in terms of when we see this kind of the follow through of events, that was the period in which Marco Polo was exploring China, or entered China, and discovered their extraordinary technological advancements and brought back a huge range of materials that had never been seen before in Europe. And that began, it was also the period when the Mongols were expanding their empire through Asia. And so, yeah, it opened up these trade routes and these new kind of new possibilities of trade and technology, and the idea of colonization, really, or the idea of exploration really began with Marco Polo. Columbus and others were inspired by his travels, and that really set in motion the colonial era. So we can see how there's this kind of follow through from period to period. Each one of those, you can see again in the way that I described that Marco Polo was an outsider. He was not, he was not Asian. He did not come from anywhere in Asia. And so he was this outsider coming in, and although he didn't disrupt the established power, he brought the things that he brought from China changed the nature of global power, and in a similar way kind of introduced to China the presence and the possibility of this other, global power that would eventually play out in terms of, where we are today, that we see this very interesting standoff between the current global power being the US and China. So yeah, it's all very interesting. Anyway, I'm digressing. The other thing that's really interesting about this period of time in relation to First Nations issues, in relation to changing the date, in relation to the voice to Parliament, is that we also have in March, on the 8th of March, we have Saturn moving into Pisces. And that is very interesting as well. Saturn rules structures, foundations, and the materialization of things into reality. And Pisces is the realm in which there are no borders, no boundaries. Everything is completely amorphous. And it is literally like an oceanic realm. It's highly creative, highly spiritual. It is associated sometimes with Indigenous people as well. So Saturn comes in here bringing some structures, some solidity, and some, really building a foundation for the future, as at the same time that Pluto is beginning its cycle in Aquarius, undoing the existing structures of society and bringing those from the margins into the center and removing those from the center to the outside. And so some of the things, Saturn moves much quicker than Pluto. Pluto will spend 20 years in Aquarius doing this, having this revolutionary impact on society at all levels, technologically, societally, in all kinds of ways. Saturn moves much faster. It spends about 2.5 years in a sign, 2.5 years to 3 years in a sign. It'll be 3 years in Pisces. And so the last time that it was in Pisces was between 1993 and 1996. What is really interesting about that is that the Australia Day was only nationally instituted as a national holiday on in 1994. So that happened the last time that Saturn was in Pisces. Prior to that, so let's go back actually to 1938, the day of mourning. That took place when Saturn was in Pisces, and the protesters were calling for then was an end to the callous treatment of Aboriginal people by the white man, in the language of the day. And they were also calling for the recognition of Aboriginal citizenship and the legislation of laws to provide for the improvement of life for Aboriginal people. Interestingly, the referendum on the recognition of the citizenship of Aboriginal people in Australia took place in 1967, and that was also a period when Saturn moved into Pisces. Actually, on the referendum date, let me just check that. So when the referendum occurred, Saturn had just left Pisces and moved into Aries. So we are about to move into Pisces, and then we will see Saturn move into Aries in 2025. Saturn was in Pisces on the day of mourning in 1938. And it entered Pisces 3 days after Australia Day was declared a national holiday in 1994. What we kind of see here, and I had one other note there actually, what was it? And interestingly, now we are entering Saturn in Pisces again, and we are looking at another referendum on the voice to Parliament. So the little bit of hope that I just wanted to throw out there is that it looks to me very likely that we will see a big shift during this period in terms of the power relations in this country and the way that we are able to recognise First Nations peoples and their rights, their sovereignty, and that I would not be surprised if we see a change of the date at least, by 2025, I hope. The other thing that we saw actually in 1993, this is what I meant to mention and I forgot, between 1993 and 1996, not only was Australia Day inaugurated as a national holiday, but the Native Title Act was introduced. And that was really interesting because it followed a long fight by Eddie Mabo to have his native title recognised, and that was recognised in 1902 when Saturn was in Aquarius, as it still is now. When the Native Title Act was introduced in December 1993, Saturn was at the very final degrees of Aquarius, exactly as it is now. And once the Act really was in full swing in 1994, we saw the beginning of what was really a renaissance, cultural renaissance in Aboriginal Australia, with the Aboriginal people were required to prove their connection to land through the continuation of their cultural practices. And so how do you prove your ownership or connection to land to white people who only see posts and lines and maps that are recognisable to them in grids and buildings, etc.? So this seems very Piscean to me, that there are no obvious borders and boundaries, and once Saturn goes in there, it is establishing those clear boundaries, and in that period began this process of First Nations groups demonstrating their connection, long-standing, enduring connection to country through art, culture, ceremony, and spirituality. Their art, the birth of the Aboriginal art movement really sort of began around then, and it reflected this incredibly rich and complex, sophisticated worldview that was extraordinarily beautiful to behold. So I think this is really, really an interesting and exciting time in many, many ways. In the world, we are seeing the rise of Indigenous power of First Nations people globally. Since 2020, that has really been going through the roof. And during this Pluto in Aquarius period, I am really kind of looking for, expecting to see that to continue, and to really see those who have been marginalized really starting to find power in society in ways in which we're able to see a true expression of equality, a truer expression of equality. Of course, there's no such thing as utopia. We will be working out many problems, and there will be new problems to navigate during the Pluto and Aquarius period. Technology, social media are going to be very powerful tools in this process. And yet the thing to remember is that every single phase, every time, the reason that astrology works is because we can look back at history and we can see what the character of these cycles indicates, and how they lead from one to another, how a concept, ideas, themes are developed over time. I'm reminded again of one of my favorite quotes. I always quote it, and I'll probably get it wrong, so I don't have it in front of me, even though it's quite simple and powerful. And that was Dr. Martin Luther King's quote, that the moral arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. And we do see that consecutively in these periods, that there is an increase in rights, human rights. There is an increase in freedom. There is an increase, generally speaking, in the the access we have to a society that cares for people collectively in a better way. Here in Australia, of course, that's a different scenario we're looking at here, because it was a complete dispossession, displacement and oppression of First Nations people. And although there have been tiny little steps along the way to improve and rectify some of that damage, it is not fixed. We absolutely have so much to do. And so I feel very inspired that we're going to see a shift during this period that really brings about a change that we're all looking for. And I'm very excited to see the continued exponential expansion of First Nations brilliance and power in Australia and in the world. So I'm going to leave it there, and I am sending big love. I will be putting more out about these huge transits, this big transition that we are going through, we're about to go through, and that we're preparing for now. And yes, in the meantime, sending you all big love and best wishes, and my very special biggest love to all my First Nations friends and family. I'm thinking of you. All right, big love, everyone. Speak soon.